as a part of our
I have lots of affidavits and I've kept records of everything.
Those are the things that help out. The nosebleeds. I mean, I can believe you right now that each one of those nosebleeds was directly associated with emissions off of one of those facilities. So we're going to prove that. And so if we got medical professionals giving us information to support that allegation, we can use that. We want to be patient. We want to stop this thing as early as possible we can. But in order to do that, we're going to have to have a documentation to help us in those cases.
What do we do about the children who are at the schools and stuff? A lot of times that, you know, we make a complaint at 6 in the morning. By the time you get there, when they're out at band practice and stuff, it's gone. But yet those kids have spent an hour and a half out there practicing. And I'm beginning to think it'd be easier to close the schools than it would be to shut a well down to protect their safety.
I mean, the challenge of shutting the well down, I've not experienced it yet. So I don't know what it's going to take to do that. I do know that when we get complaints and we start determining that, hey, these things are going on. In fact, we've talked to complainants who called us before and said, well, don't come out now because this is going to happen. It happens at a certain time of day. Well, two things. We want to make sure that we're adhering to our policy and getting out there. But many times, we don't expect that we're going to resolve that violation on that initial complaint response. We want to get out there and see what's going on, find out if there's anything going on that might be imminent, substantial, or latent again. But the other part of it is determining what might have caused that activity. So we're going to do things like the recon, where we're going out there when we expect it to happen. If you're saying it's happening on Tuesday at 10 o'clock, we want to start being out there Tuesday at 10 o'clock. So that's what our recon investigations are about, trying to be there when we have the best chance of reproducing the situation that you observed when you were there. So that's what we're trying to do.
Have either of you been on a tour of the Argyle and Barkerville area to see the activity that's going on out there, or to see the Argyle collection facility that's going in? It's monstrous, and it's hundreds of feet with the people homes. The dog kennel is there.
You need to see it. I mean, you need to see that.
I'd be happy to
you're
take
going to
you guys
have
on a
another
tour to see
dish
it.
in
It's
just
unbelievable.
a few minutes. You really need to see it. It's shocking.
I've seen site plans of it. The last part of it on the island, what facility was there, but I have not seen facility. So.
Please, I'd be happy to take you guys on a tour of our area and show you this collection facility. It's frightening. Thank you.
About the affidavits, when I first fracturing the well at Razor Ranch, I was given the affidavits by a TCU investigator, and I was told to promote or log an affidavit, and I did that like religiously for 2 more pages. And I remember specifically asking her if I need to get that notarized, and she said no. And when my paperwork came back, then it was all not valid because it wasn't notarized. So I just kind of like to find out for sure if you do have to have those notarized before you send those in and they're valid.
And I apologize for any misinformation. Yeah, it should be notarized.
My name is Deborah Rogers. I live in Fort Worth. This journey started for me over a year ago. I think, to my knowledge, I'm the first person in North Texas to do air testing near a gas drilling facility. So I've provided testing results to TCEQ on numerous occasions. Chesapeake Energy moved in the end of April of this year and began drilling the first of what is apparently going to be 12 wells 600 feet from my home. At the beginning of May, I called TCEQ because the odors were so egregious. They sent an inspector out. It was interesting. The odors lasted all day on the hike and bike trail. People were complaining about it. It runs right behind the pad site. I called finally about 4:30 in the afternoon. TCEQ showed up at 9:30 at night, but they called me first. And they said, we're on our way. And I walked outside, and it was still, the stench was overwhelming. And about 10 minutes later, it disappeared completely. And that's when I realized that these operators on these pad sites can control emissions somehow. I don't know how they did it, but the odors disappeared immediately. TCEQ then showed up about 10 minutes later, and of course there was nothing to smell. I told them that I would be placing a canister if the odors returned. I got up the next morning, the odors were just as strong as they had been the day before. I waited about 48 more hours for the wind speeds to die down, and I set a canister out and I set it to the side of the pad site. and we ended up with sulfur compounds about 250 times what is normal for ambient urban air, according to EPA. We had benzene hovering around long-term ESLs. We had the usual, the xylenes, the toluenes, ethylbenzene. It's the same signature of compounds every time. I sent these testing results off to you, Tony, and Alyssa, and Dr. Honeycutt, and I never received any response from anyone. Chesapeake moved in a few weeks ago, began drilling again, and this time I set the canister out. I didn't bother to call TCEQ. Oh, I need to go back. TCEQ, after I set the canister out, came out and used one of their, I called again and complained. They used the toxic vapor analyzer. They said the highest level they could record on my property was 1.3 parts per million, and therefore they could not place a canister, and you heard the results. Obviously, the toxic vapor analyzers are not sensitive enough. They're not designed to test ambient urban air, or ambient air, and they can be used as a screening tool, but I do think that the 5 parts per million is way, way too high before setting out a canister, because we clearly had toxic chemicals in the air, in spite of the fact that they only reported 1.3. A few weeks ago, they moved in again, drilled another well. Again, the odors were overwhelming. I placed another canister. I got the results back the other day. This time I placed a canister directly downwind in one of my back pastures. Benzene, 62.4. Ethylbenzene, 64.7. Styrene, 207. Toluene, 59.4. Trimethylbenzene ethyltoluene, 8.3. Trimethyl 1, 2, and 4, trimethylbenzene 25.3, xylenes 143, sulfur compounds 18.1, 17.6, 10, 25, very, very high levels of toxins. I feel like my home is being systematically poisoned, and I do not think that's too strong of a term to use. And no one will help. I've heard a lot of talk about the issue of we must protect jobs and versus ensuring the public health, protection of public health. And I'd like to address that as well tonight. Representative Cook made the following quote recently, which I found of interest, and that is a statement made time and again by elected officials, state agencies, and industry in North Texas with regard to gas drilling and its implications for our health. He stated that his goal is to ensure citizens' public health is protected without causing a financial hardship for the employees and families who depend on jobs from Texas' energy sector. We've all heard this argument many times, but I find it to be one of the weakest. This argument hints at a rather disturbing fact that a balance of toxins in population can somehow be found which will be acceptable. But who will be the sacrificial population? Whose children will be put at greater risk for leukemia for benzene exposure? Whose families will be burdened with higher levels of formaldehyde, which, by the way, the industry's own study in Fort Worth found the highest levels of formaldehyde that scientists have seen any place on the planet outside of Brazil, right on the east side of Fort Worth near the Lake Arlington compressor station. No violations found. Is that truly the political statement that our elected officials and agencies intend to make? Is it truly the public relations message that industry wants to employ? Must it come down to the luck of the draw that wherever the gas company chooses to place its pad site, those residents nearest will be at greatest risk and thus sacrificed? Tony mentioned the clause. 15,000 wells have been drilled or permitted in North Texas thus far, and none of those will have to come under the new rules, according to TCEQ, at this point. If industry insists on using this argument that jobs will be lost if they are asked to change their current production model, then they are essentially telling us that they are incapable of producing their product and making money if they misuse protective technology. Therefore, we, the residents, should shoulder the potential for catastrophic illness in order to make their product more economically attractive. This gives a whole new meaning to the phrase, your money or your life. If we take Representative Cook at his word, then he is effectively saying that industry cannot maintain jobs unless it is allowed some leeway in what it is being asked to do in order to protect the health and safety of the residents of North Texas. What is even more disturbing is that our elected officials and state agencies are willing to determine which populations are sacrificed rather than imposing protective measures which are cost-effective and which would still allow the extraction of minerals but mitigate the potential for catastrophic illness. This is a huge red flag. Something very clearly is wrong with this production model. I would suggest that it may be time for industry and our state agencies to engage in some serious revisionary thinking. It is absurd to think that such an industrial activity as gas drilling with its known toxic processes and byproducts would be allowed to occur near our homes, schools, and offices without the use of protective equipment. Unfortunately, that is precisely what has been allowed to happen here today. It's time that we insist on more controls. Thank you.
Lisa Park. Hi, I'm Lisa Park. Forgive me, this is my first time to be here. I'm Lisa Park, excuse me, this is my first time to be here. My family lives in Allison, or we did live in Allison. Community, Decatur, Texas, and Miles County. We've been forced out of our home. I want to thank y'all for the time for coming to listen to us. I know that's not a good seat to be in tonight. I want to address the 12-hour response time first. When we call in the early evenings, the odor and physical effects are much greater than in the mornings. However, the 12-hour response time allows TCEQ to not have to show up until in the mornings. This really needs to change. On, let's see, April 14th, I called at 6:30 in the evening. I had a dead animal, a dog that laid down and would not get up. We had nosebleeds. I had to send my family away, and y'all didn't show up until 6 o'clock the next morning. As to the fact that we can only call in when we smell an odor, my family has suffered many physical conditions, and we no longer have an adequate sense of smell. Shouldn't we be able to call when we have severe health effects? I've learned that the TCEQ is using a victim's position statement in regards to their health condition for violations. Being that TCEQ accepted this position statement, then they should understand the fact that an effect from exposure is the loss of sense of smell, and accept our complaint as an immediate response required. On July 25th of this year, I strongly persuade TCEQ to respond immediately. And not only did they find 6 violations, but the investigator himself became very ill on the site due to the admissions, which is clearly stated in his reports. I have a copy of that, and I would like to see it. Are you going to call the Attorney General on these cases?
If that's a question directed to that particular one, I can't make that determination. We made our investigation. I think you referred to that report there. It then goes to our enforcement division for processing. At that point, we have several different options. And those options really depend on the interaction between this agency, the facilities, their compliance history, what they've done in compliance on whether or not that will be a case that we will settle and resolve with administrative penalties and technical requirements there in the enforcement division, whether it goes to our litigation division for adjudication, or whether it's referred directly to the Attorney General's office for potential shutdown arrests. So I just can't make that determination on this.
My family has suffered far more than any of us moms or wives should ever have to encounter. We're putting out a serious cry for help. Please help us all. We appreciate all the help that we have received, but we all need more.